Hey and welcome to another video. In this video, I just want to let y'all know that there has been change to the vehicle's upgrade system, and I'm going to explain what the changes are, the difference between the old system and the new system. For that, let's get started. So this is the old system. It's very simple, very basic, very to the point. So what you do here is we get the car's torque, we multiply it by a percentage, and then we get the torque and then add that to the resulting value that comes out here, and then we set the car's new torque value after that. And then we save that value, check to say we have purchased this part, and then save all the information. So this part does work, but it's very limiting because if you don't do your calculations properly, you could turn a starter car into an endgame car, which kind of breaks the point of having multiple cars in your game. Because why would the player want to buy a, let's say, for example, a T3 car if they can take their starter car and then turn it into an endgame car? There's no point, right? You can just save up the money, fully upgrade your T1 car, and then pretty much use that to then play all the way to the end of the game. This system was very limiting in that regard, but with the new system, we are, or at least I think I've got it to be more in line with more mainstream upgrade systems where the player can freely interchange between upgrade stages. So if the player has purchased a stage 3 part and a stage 5 part, but now they want to go back to the stage 3 part, they can do that without affecting too much of the car's performance, because instead of directly affecting the car's torque, we are using the car's default torque value as a reference to then get the calculations, and then we add it back into without affecting it and like directly affecting it. It's also used as a reference to get the new torque value. That is the difference between the old system and the new system. So to take a look at the new system, what we have here is, firstly, we have also changed how we get the cost for the cars. So here I created a PDA called PDA upgrade costs, and then we have a base for each component. And then we also have a multiply value for that, because if you have multiple tiers of cars in your game, you can't want to have all of them cost exactly the same unless that is what you want. But instead of having to do all that, you can just have a multiply value. So then you have a base cost for each component and their stages. And then based on the tier of the car, you then apply a multiply value to that to then make it seem as though you are charging more for the same parts, right? So it's the cost for a T1 car's cams will be different from that of a T4 car's cams, right? That would be the end result of this new way of calculating how much money needs to be reduced when you purchase upgrades. And then go about just saving the value, and then this is where the main change happens. So the main change between the two is that now we have multiply values instead of directly affecting the car's torque. So what I mean by that is, if we take a look at the blueprint structure, is each one of these components will now act as a multiplier for the base torque instead of directly affecting the torque itself. So the calculation would look like this, where you get the base torque, and then you get each component and then how much they would add to the base torque, and then you multiply all these together, and then you set that as the final torque value. So each one of these by default starts off at a value of 1, and as you progress through the upgrade stages, you then set it to maybe something like, let me just show here as an example. So these are the values that I use to test out the system. So with the first stage, you add 1.021 to the torque. At stage 2, you add 1.042. At stage 3 is 1.064. Stage 4 is 1.085. And then at stage 5, you add 1.108. So those are the multiply values that you end up adding. And then this will stack up for each of the components that you're going to add to improve your car's performance. which would, if you stack them all up, let's say for example, if the player has purchased stage 5 parts for all of your components, then you would have it be, let's say for example, you start off a car at 250, and then with all stage 5 parts, it would maybe be like 1.8 times its base value. So that's how you would achieve that. And then this also makes it so that if the player does want to go back and forth with their stages, depending on what type of track they want to use the car for, they can easily do that because it you can interchange the parts. What allows this is the new code as well. So what you do is, instead of simply checking for the money first and then subtracting that, first what we do is we check for the BBS parts. So we have a new BBS system as well. What we do is we have to create a new blueprint structure for each component. And then within these blueprint structures, we have Boolean values. So each time the player purchases a new stage, we then take this Boolean value and then we check it as true. So they start off as false and then we check them as true to say that the player has in fact purchased this. So we're not using an inventory system. We are using a car-based performance. So what I mean by that is that when you purchase a stage for a car, it's for that car specifically. You cannot then remove that part from this car and then transfer it to a different car. To do that, you would need an inventory system. We don't have an inventory system. We have a car-specific upgrade system. So what we do is we go to the BBS Garage Cars, we use the vehicle ID to get the accurate car that the player is currently driving, and then within the blueprint structure at the bottom, we have to add every single one of those blueprint structures for the components in here so that we can alter them from the blueprint structure instead of trying to go and find them in other places. By adding it here, it makes things way more convenient as well. So then we can get it directly here. So we get from the BBS garage cars, we break it, we get the BBS that we're looking for, and then within that BBS we break again. And then we get the Boolean value that corresponds to the upgrade system, the upgrade stage that we're trying to purchase. And then from the branch, if it's true, we just reinstall the part and then set the multiply value to what it needs to be. And then we save that. And then we have this other function here, which is tied to a text block, which lets the player know which stage they have currently installed on their car. And then if the player doesn't yet own the particular stage for their component, we have an integer variable that we then set an amount to. Now I use, for understanding the code simpler, I use the same value as the stage. So if it's a stage 1 cam, then I set the variable to 1, and then I pass this into the pop-up widget. So this will function the same as with the dealership, where if you click on the button, it will then um, destroy all other widgets and then give you a pop-up that says you're going to purchase this component for X amount, and then you can decide yes or no. If you say yes, and then you will run this code, which is the purchase code, where we then check if the amount of money the player has is more than the base price along with the multiplied value for that particular tier. And then if it's true, we will then set the multiplied value for that component, save it, and then we will set the stage for that corresponding component to true, so that if we come back in, we want to reinstall that particular component, we can then do that because we do in fact own it, because now it's true, we have purchased it, and then just reinstall it, and then we save all of this information. And then after we have made the purchase successfully, we then remove this pop-up widget, and then we recreate the component specific widget and then add that to the viewport. And then at that point, we then run this new function here on top, which is the check stage install. This one will get run whenever the widget gets created, so that the player will know which stage for that component is currently installed. We then also have another function attached to the end of each one, which here it says factory installed, and then here it says stage 1 installed. So this is for when you reinstall a particular stage for that component, so that we can update the player and let them know, okay, you have reinstalled this part, or you have now purchased that other part. For the PDA upgrades, this is where we set the base values, and then we also have the multipliers. So in here you can see we have, for the cams, we have stage 1, the base value is 8000, and then 20, 40, 72, and then 120. So these will be the base values, and then depending on which car the player is currently driving, we will then add a tier multiplier on top of the base cost, and then that will give us the final cost for that particular part for the car that the player is currently driving. Oh, and then this is how we get the price for that particular component. So that variable that we passed over, which is the cams, which is this part over here, the cam stage, the variable, we passed this over into here. It was a little bit of a workaround to try and get how to work this, because it's the same system we use for the dealership, but in the dealership we create each button based on the amount of cars within the blueprint structure. But now here, each button is added manually on its own. So this was the workaround for that. Create a variable and then set that, and then pass that over to then the widget, and then use that to then determine everything else. So we can find here, we can get the base cost um, for the car. As you can see, it's still a little bit of a work in progress, because this one is different from this one over here. As you can see here, we have this one. I didn't add it because I was busy testing it. As I said, I just recently finished working on the code, so there's a couple things I missed here and there. But then this is pretty much what the final code is going to look like. This is the prior to finalization. This one pretty much followed the same idea as the old system, where it was simply just purchase, check the price, save the price, and then we set the multiply value. So this was the in between. This was how I used to just make sure that the code works. And then since I found out the code works, and then I added the ability to then create a pop-up widget so that the player can then know what the actual cost of the component they want to buy is. Because this one simply just did it on its own, and then if you didn't have enough money, it would simply just tell you, okay, you don't have enough money, but you'll never actually know how much it costs unless you added a text block on the button or somewhere close to each button that would then put maybe at the bottom or the top the cost of the component. So by creating the pop-up and then making it so that when this widget gets created, every other widget disappears, the player can then focus on that widget or one set of information at a time, which makes everything just look a lot cleaner as well. So that is pretty much the new system in a nutshell. I hope I covered everything. I think I did. And then in the next video, since the old system has now been scrapped, we are going to have to make the necessary changes, which is we're going to create the new blueprint structures for the components. I'm not going to create as many as I have in the project. I'm going to only use 2 just to show that the system does in fact work, because if I only used 1, then it probably wouldn't fully display the capabilities, because I would need at least 2 to then show that if you bought a stage 5 and then switch back to a stage 3, how much is actually being affected to the car's current torque value. So to show that, I would need at least 2 to show that, okay, if you purchase this, how much is changed, and if you remove it, it should reflect the same amount being added as the same amount is being removed, because you only removed 1 component. So we're gonna do that, and then we're also gonna create the PDA, and we are going to create the widgets. We'll see how much we can cover within the next video. But and then one more thing I want to cover, I don't know if y'all saw, but in the BPS I also figured out how to create a new boost system, so that's also going to be something that's going to be covered. So now we have more things to do as well. So now we have a boost installed, boost consumption, boost refill, max boost, the decrease delay, and then the refill delay. So now we have a new boost system also to work with, which is also going to result in more changes happening. With that, that brings us to the end of this explanation video for the new systems that's going to be implemented. And until the next one.